Pleased to be joined now on the Newsline by Mitch Rolling. Mr. Rolling is co-founder and director of research at Always On Energy Research. aoenergy.org is the website. Mr. Rolling, good morning. Thanks for taking the time.
Hey, good morning, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Always On Energy Research. Who are you folks and what do you do?
Yeah, well, we're a energy modeling and energy research think tank. So we do a lot of energy analysis on the energy transition, the goal of transitioning from traditional resources like coal, natural gas, and oil to wind and solar. We do modeling on that end. We test the reliability. We see how much it costs and things of that nature.
Now, why is it? This is a fundamental question. People look at their bills every month, and they have been told for years to conserve energy, and you'll save money. Well, how come the bills are still just as high in many cases, but we're using less energy? That doesn't seem to make sense at face value.
Yeah, well, that really comes down to, so in the world of traditional resources, when you had coal, natural gas, oil making up the majority of the electric system, these traditional resources had a lot of fuel costs, a lot of variable costs that changed if you use less. So if you use less energy, then the price would come down. Utilities would spend less on fuel. They would require less revenue from their ratepayers, and that means your bill would be lower. There was a real chance of energy savings in that world. Today, we are moving to a world where the primary energy sources that we're building are now wind, solar, and battery. Now, these are made up of almost entirely fixed costs. Now, fixed costs, they need to be recovered no matter how much energy is used. So if you try to conserve energy and lower your bill, well, that will create a revenue deficit now with these utilities who will just go back to their utility commissions to recover those lost revenue from their ratepayers. So before, you could put on a sweater, lower your thermostat, save money. Now that is changing because revenue is now decoupling away from sales.
That's a fascinating change, and it came about because of these fixed costs for the alternate forms of energy you mentioned. Is utilizing this different set of forms of energy. Iowa's very dependent on wind and solar these days. Is that a good thing for the grid overall or a good thing for consumers? Those could be two different things.
Right. Well, we would argue that it's not a good thing, right? And there are ways that, it's not necessarily that if you have fixed costs that it's bad for the system. Traditional resources had fixed costs too. You can think of it like your car, the loan payments, your lease payments, those are the fixed costs, right? It doesn't matter if you drive 1 mile or 1,000 miles, you have to pay that same money back. But the variable costs are the fuel costs, right? That if you drive less, you use less fuel, and so you can have savings. Now, the problem is that when you create a system of mostly fixed costs that also may not show up when needed most. So imagine a car that had no fuel costs, right? Like a solar powered, car. Well, you still need to drive at night sometimes. So you're going to need a backup car at some point to drive at night. So now you're paying, because your listeners might be thinking, well, hey, no fuel costs, only the fixed costs. Other power plants have fixed costs too, so now I'm just getting rid of the fuel savings. Well, that's not entirely true because you still need something when the wind doesn't blow, the sun doesn't set. So now you're paying for the fixed costs of the wind and solar assets, the fixed costs of the backup energy sources, and then also the fuel costs when you can't rely on wind and solar. So, when you look at a nuclear plant is also primarily fixed costs. However, a nuclear plant can run 24/7 all the time. So the real thing here is that you're now doubling up on fixed costs because you need that backup energy, and you still have to pay some of the fuel costs. So we would argue that this is very bad for consumers.
Mitch Rowling is our guest. He's co-founder and director of research at Always On Energy Research, aoenergy.org. He also is co-author of a Substack entitled Energy Bad Boys. Now, here's the thing on this whole issue with the solar and the wind and whatnot. Did the people who advocated such heavy use of this technology, did they know that from an economic standpoint, it was going to be harmful? I mean, for example, these, they don't tell you, or they didn't tell us, wind turbine blades, they have a lifespan, and then you've got to replace them, but there's no way to dispose of them, et cetera, et cetera. Did these folks know going in that they were creating an industry that was far less reliable and had all of these hidden costs?
So I think it's a mix, and I think it's dependent on who you're looking at of who did they know, who's the they? I think a lot of people went into this, some people went into this with good hearts, good intentions. They wanted to lower emissions, and you can agree with that or not. We would say that the policy on the grid should be mostly based on affordability and reliability. But then there's the other world of the utilities where, you can be pretty sure that they knew the shortcomings of going down this route. And they did it anyways because in the regulated utility sphere, the way that they earn money, the way that they profit is not by selling more energy, it's by building more. Utilities make a regulated rate of return, and so the more they build, the more that they can earn on their rate of return by putting it in the rate base, and that's how they make profit. And so when you have a bunch of coal plants, for example, on the grid that are fully depreciated, the utilities are no longer making money on those plants, right? Because they no longer have any capital costs and the rate of return doesn't apply to those. So those are all pass-through costs, and that's really good for consumers. That's low-cost energy right there. And when you present the utilities with an opportunity of shutting down those low-cost, no-profit plants for the utilities and building new wind and solar that they can add to the rate base, that they can earn their rate of return on, that's a really good proposition from them as a business, right? But they are regulated monopolies. Their ratepayers are captive, so the consumers have no choice but to stay with their utilities. And so we would argue that the utilities would absolutely have known the shortcomings of this. They did it anyways because they were allowed to. In many cases, they were mandated to, like Minnesota, north of you. They were mandated to do that. So it kind of is dependent on who you're asking, but we would say a lot of people should have known. And the fact that they didn't is a clear sign of their shortcomings as of the trust that we give them as grid operators and planners. Someone should have known, and we were certainly saying it. I joined this world in 2018, and it almost felt like no one was saying these things. But someone should have known, and they probably did. A lot of them probably did know the shortcomings.
That's a very thoughtful answer to that question, because it'd be easy to just blame and here's this faceless, nameless group of they, but right. Obviously somebody had to know, and I assume it has to do with money or a perhaps misguided thought about climate, et cetera, et cetera. That's my view. I'm not imputing that to you. What should people do? So they have this information, okay? aoenergy.org. They go there to see the research that you and the team have put together. What can they do at this point to either change the situation? Because, again, it's coming out of our pockets now. And as you know, it's not like you've got a lot of different options. So what can people do, having heard this conversation?
Well, a lot of this comes down at this point to narrative wars, right? The narrative is that we need to close down these plants and we need to build low-emission wind and solar plants. And for us, that conclusion isn't simply a given, right? Especially because a megawatt is not worth a megawatt in some cases. Like a megawatt of coal is much more valuable to the system in a reliability standpoint than a megawatt of wind and solar. And I think that conversation doesn't get talked about enough. And I think a lot of people think that, if you just replace 1,000 megawatts of coal with 1,000 megawatts of wind, what's the big deal? It's the same thing. And it's not. And that's where we're at in this world. We need to win that narrative. We need to win it with facts. And so right now, I think the best thing that people can do is share research that shows this, talk about it. Don't just give in to, the we need to close down coal plants and build wind and solar narratives. Learn about it, know what's going on, and then reach out to your utility. There's a lot of proceedings that allow the consumer to give their voice, and if the utilities and policymakers feel that heat, they will change up. They've been allowed, the people pushing these policies to close coal plants and build wind and solar, they've been allowed by just kind of like everyone thinking that it's a given that we need to do this. And I think that we need to change that narrative, and we need to do it with facts. And we have the facts, fortunately, and we need to share this with the people in charge of our grid.
What is the biggest, I'll say, whopper, lie or misstatement or whatever that you come across? In other words, you're rebutting a narrative with data, which is obviously the way to do it. But what is among the chief things that you almost roll your eyes and say, oh, no, not this again, that's being promulgated and, to your earlier point, accepted as fact?
Yes. So the biggest one that we see, when I come across anyone saying this, I have that moment. It's wind and solar are the lowest cost, cheapest energy sources around. And when I hear that, I know that they either are misleading or they simply don't know the background on that. So when you're just building a wind and solar facility, sure, the cost of setting that up, it used to be cheap. Now it's not so cheap. But back you go 4 years ago, yeah, it was pretty inexpensive. However, what I mentioned earlier about needing that backup energy, when the wind doesn't blow, you have no energy, right? And so you need some type of backup energy source. Well, those costs are almost always excluded from those statements saying that wind and solar are the cheapest energy sources, right? And because what matters to the grid is not the cost of building a facility, it's the system costs of maintaining reliability. And so when you have a natural gas or a coal plant, that can run 24/7. When demand goes up, when electricity use goes up, you put in more fuel and you can increase the electricity production. You can't do that with wind and solar. So the system cost is much larger because you need that backup energy, and you need a huge transmission system built out to bring wind production from far away to the sources that use them. And so when I hear that wind and solar are the lowest cost resources, that is the biggest misconception that we come across.
All sorts of great information from Always On Energy Research, aoenergy.org. Mitch Rollins, thanks so much for the excellent conversation, giving a lot of people some encouragement to fight back against some of this. I was just driving through areas of the state that used to be very nice. Now they're full of wind turbines for no good reason. And so I think there are plenty of people listening who have that same view. Thanks so much. Come back again, please.
Thanks for having me.
And Mr. Rolling joined us live on the Newsline on News Talk 1540 KXEL, where Iowa comes to talk.